Okay, we're live here. So it is our sound for video session. It is the 29th of December, 2016. And today we have a special guest here with us. This is Gregg Palmer. And Gregg, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I started getting into video and audio probably about 4 years ago, mostly to help my daughter out. She was doing a lot of projects with high school. So we started with a Nikon D7000 DSLR. Did the typical Rode video mic on top of the DSLR. Found out pretty quick that didn't work too well. Ended up getting graduating to a Zoom H4N. We used that for a while. Got a boom and a Rode NT-G3. Used that for a while. Then started doing some interviews. Started doing some other stuff, mostly with nonprofits and some community organizations. And started collecting some wireless mics. Ended up getting 4 G3s. Okay. Used those for a while. I started having some problems downtown using the G3s with interference. And so when Sennheiser came out with the AVX series, I went ahead and got 4 of those. And my plan was to go ahead and sell the G3s. But then I started thinking, sound guy never wants to give up equipment. So I started finding there's a little bit of a shortfall in the design of the AVX. There are some conditions where it seems like it doesn't have a very good transmission capability, especially when you're out in the open. Like I did a couple shoots when I was out in the forest, and I really had a hard time getting a good signal. If there was even just one body basically between the transmitter and the receiver at maybe 50 feet or so, it wouldn't pick up the signal.
Interesting.
And so I decided to go ahead and keep the G3s because it seems like the G3s are more reliable in that type of situation where you don't have anything to bounce a signal off of. I still love the AVX. I use it indoors all the time, mostly because it's so simple. You just turn a switch on, thing links up, and off you go.
Yep. Yep.
But I started thinking about at about the same time I started having a problem. There are some circumstances where I'm filming, especially like community events, where the audio was not matching, scratch audio was not matching main camera audio, or I had multiple cameras and the multiple cameras were not matching on the audio tracks because of the camera placement or whatever, for whatever reason. So I started thinking about, hey, make a lot more sense. And I started reading up about wireless hops to try to put a good guide track on every camera so that the audio absolutely matches. So when you go into sync later on, you should have absolutely no problems with syncing. So that I started figuring out how to use the G3, and it was a real learning curve to try to figure out exactly what the right settings were and how to do it. And mostly I've learned this through trial and error because I haven't seen a lot of good information on the web on exactly how to do this. And so that's where I'm today. I use all 4. Either I'm using the 4 for wireless hops, or I'm using the 4 G3s for extra mics.
Okay.
But generally, I always try to have at least one camera recording my output out of the mixer, because I've had a couple instances where you forget to hit the record button or something else. And if you have your mixer output recorded on the camera, you have a lot better chance of getting, keeping something usable on the camera.
That's an interesting thought too there. Yeah, because that is, I have had that happen a couple times where you thought you were rolling, but in fact you weren't.
Yeah. I use pre-record for that reason. So you have 6 seconds of pre-record on the Zoom F8. I use that all the time. But still, there's been once or twice where I double pumped the switch and didn't realize it, especially when you got a boom in one hand and you're trying to hit the record in it with the other hand. And where I accidentally double pumped the button and ended up not getting anything on the mixer. And so if you have really good audio on the camera track, it's still very usable.
Okay.
So,
well, that's actually that's exactly what we wanted to talk about today. In fact, is we had that question come up. To be honest, that's not something I've done a whole lot of, because again, on my corporate work, it's mainly me, as I'm doing everything, camera, sound, everything. And I've been using, to be honest, I've been using time code clocks, and that's been working great. That's one solution. Can be a pretty expensive solution, but if you've got these extra wireless
Yeah,
systems.
that's what I was thinking is I was trying to figure out how to multitask what I had.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like having 8 wireless systems because it gives me the option to basically go all wireless on all 8 tracks if I need it.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, that's not the case. Usually, I have a couple wireless systems that I can set up as camera hops. And then I don't know, about 6 months ago, I went ahead and bought the Sennheiser 300 in-ear monitor. And that works with the G3 transmitter, so that you can give this to your boom operator if you happen to have a boom operator, and he can monitor the same signal, and it works pretty well. It's not great, but it works pretty well.
Yeah, it's certainly a more affordable solution than most IFBs or, however else you
Right,
might be
right.
doing it. Yeah.
And I've looked at the IFB systems. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money just for a very specialized tool. And maybe someday I'll get there, but right now I was just trying to do something cheap that sort of gets to the same end state.
Yep. So how does that setup? How does that setup work at a practical level? I mean, in terms of you've got the transmitter in your bag with your mixer,
Right.
presumably, and then
You essentially just reverse the units. So you carry the transmitter with you.
okay.
You take your output from your mixer, run it into the transmitter, and then you put the receiver on the camera, and you just use the Sennheiser, I think it's a CL1 connector, and that goes into your receiver, and then you dump that into your DSLR.
Okay. And just a couple practical things. So on the mixer, what do you have to do to get the output levels right? Or are you just going line out into the transmitter?
I'm just going line out.
Okay.
And we talked about this a little bit, I think, in October.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I may have given you some bad information. There is a special cable that Remote Audio produces, and it's supposed to do that. It's supposed to go from the TA3 female connector
Mm-hmm.
To the Sennheiser locking 3.5 millimeter connector. And that's what I've been using. I've been using 2 of those because sometimes I'll broadcast boom on one channel, and I'll broadcast all the lavs on another, so that essentially if I have 2 cameras, one's always recording the boom track and the other one's always recording the lav track.
Okay.
That cable, I don't know, it's a $30 or $40 cable. They're like the only people that make it, and that's what I've been using. But I started noticing my gain is not where it should be. When I use that cable, I have to run at about a minus 21 dB sensitivity on the transmitter. And there's what I've noticed on the Sennheiser G3 transmitter is that you really want to be below about minus 20 dB, because when you go between minus 20 dB and 0 dB, you start picking up a lot of noise in the transmitter.
Okay.
And so when you're sitting with that cable, you're sitting right at sort of the margin where you start to pick up a lot of noise. So as an experiment, I just went down to the Radio Shack and picked up a 3.5 millimeter to 3.5 millimeter stereo plug cable, and I plugged that into the sub output on the Zoom, and then run that straight into the transmitter. And boy, I can take the transmitter sensitivity all the way down to minus 51, minus 55 dB.
Okay.
So there's something strange about using that cable out of the balanced output into the Sennheiser that requires you to drive the transmitter a lot harder than it should. It shouldn't have to do that.
Okay.
So a much cheaper option is just to go down and get a cheap cable. It's just a stereo 3-conductor cable that goes between the 2 units.
Yep.
And that seems to work pretty well. I've done some comparisons where I'll record a track direct to camera and then record one through the hop. And usually, the hop introduces a little bit of noise, but it's hardly any at all. It really looks clean to me when I look on a spectrograph. It looks pretty clean.
Yep. Good. Okay. So my suspicion is on the F8. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that sub out is really made for working with DSLRs. So it's sending a mic level signal out.
No, it's changeable.
Oh,
you can change it.
You can actually change it. Okay.
And you can change both the main and the sub out to be line level or mic level.
Okay.
I've essentially found that you're better off to drive a line level signal into the transmitter, even though it's going into the mic input. And the reason for that is when you, first of all, this is sort of where you get into the Zoom architecture. Zoom invested a lot of architecture making on really quiet recording. But I feel like they didn't put a lot of emphasis on the output. And so, the consumer line level really begins to hurt you if you on that back end side of the recorder.
Right.
So what I found to get the cleanest signal is to basically take the line output, the consumer line output, and route it into the mic level input on the transmitter, and then put your transmitter sensitivity way down at -50 or -51. And that keeps the noise of the transmitter way down. It's not even perceivable, really. And that seems to work really well.
Okay.
If you go to mic level output, then you have to drive the gain on the transmitter way up, and you start picking up all the transmitter noise.
Right. Okay.
So that seems to be the solution that I found anyways.
Okay. So that's interesting. Then is there anything on the receiver end with the camera that you have to do that's unusual? So you're taking, it's been a long time since I used the G3, but is there an input and an output, or just a single jack and it's switchable between input and output?
No, on the transmitter?
Sorry,
you're talking about, or on the receiver?
On the receiver, no, that's just an output. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So you just take an output there. You're generally working with DSLR cameras then? Is that?
Either that or Sennheiser makes the CL100, which is a cable that goes to an XLR.
Oh, okay.
They essentially do the same thing. They're both to interface the receiver unit into the camera.
Okay.
There's sort of I go through sort of I have it down to sort of a orchestrated setup procedure. You start with a frequency scan, pick your frequency, and then you basically use the slate tone on the mixer to set your gain level on your transmitter. And then you go to your receiver, and you adjust your gain. Usually I start at a gain of about -18 or so on the output of the receiver.
Okay.
And then you go to your DSLR, and since your slate tone is driving at -12 dB, you try to get -12 dB on your camera.
Yep.
And that way you sort of have a continuity of a signal, and the signal is the same as what the mixer is recording versus what the camera is recording. Yep. And that seems to work pretty well. That using the slate tone is sort of a reference throughout the whole system to establish all your levels. It seems to work really well.
Yep. Then you don't run the risk of clipping on the camera side as well, which is perfect.
Yeah, and I actually, I usually don't set the camera to right to -12. Usually I'm a little conservative on the camera, and I'll go to -15 or so.
Yeah.
But that process seems to work well, and I've really had good audio recording by doing that, and using the slate tone to sort of reference everything. I have tried slate toning 0 dB signal, and then you go to your transmitter and you run your transmitter gain up until you start seeing the peak indicator, and then but I found that doesn't work too well. You're better off just to use a -12 dB signal, and then just get so that the meter's fluctuating, about 2/3 on the transmitter. And then it seems to be like a good proportions of the signal to run the receiver to the right levels.
Yep. I think I remember Rick Veers wrote a book, the Location Sound Bible, and he talked about setting tone on camera. So you're essentially matching the levels on your mixer and your camera. And I think a lot of times they're using -20 dB, which is interesting. You could use -20 too. It's just whatever you pick. I just picked -12 because it's an easy number. Unlike the Canons, I think there's a -12 mark, so it's a real easy mark to find. Yep.
And the one thing I dislike about the G3s is that meter is so hard to see. It's so small that -12 you can pretty much see it, but if you use -20, it's barely coming off the stops, and so it's a little harder to see on the fluctuations to make sure you have your gain set. So a little bit more of a test tone drives the meter a little bit more, and it's a little easier to see.
Okay, that makes sense too. Yeah. A couple questions, if you don't mind, here
Sure.
about
No, go ahead.
the Sennheisers. First of all, I was very intrigued to hear the case where you were shooting with the AVX outdoors in a forest where it didn't have enough hard surfaces to bounce off, and so that was interesting.
It really surprised me. I would only have, the pack was on the back of the actress, and if I turned my back to her and we were only 10 or 20 feet away, the signal would drop.
Wow. Okay.
And I think that's just because it's a very high frequency signal.
Yeah.
They need something to bounce off of in order to get to the receiver. And so that's the one disadvantage, I think, with the AVX6 signal, is that being it's a digital signal, very high frequency, it's just not going to have the range of the UHF or a VHF signal.
Interesting. Because I have heard a number of mixers argue that the digital systems just are not ready. And I've had pretty good luck. Again, I'm corporate stuff. I'm almost always shooting indoors. And so with the digital systems I'm using, they seem to hold up really, really well indoors. Haven't done a whole ton outdoor other than just a few tests here and there, so I don't have any extensive data on that, but that's interesting to know and good to know if you're going to be shooting outdoors.
I really like the AVX. I mean, I hate to speak badly or poorly about it because it's just so much easier for me. A lot of the stuff I do is one man guy. You're running camera and sound, and just to be able to turn it on, pair it, or a lot of times it's already paired from the last time you used it, and off it's ready to go. You don't have to do a frequency scan. You don't have to do anything else. It's been a fairly reliable system, and I haven't gotten much interference on it. And it's just so easy to use. But when you're out in the open, it's just not as good of a system as the G3. And I think so that's the reason why I've kept the G3s, is because those situations where you're not inside and you don't have any reflective surfaces to bounce a signal off of, then I would probably use a G3 right out of the bat.
Yeah.
But besides that, the AVX is my primary system.
Makes sense. One other question. So as in the United States, at least, we're seeing some changes in the frequencies that will be available. How is that going to affect the particular G3 units that you have? Are you? I was confused when I started buying the G3s and A band, B band, G band. And I just, because A started at the beginning of the alphabet, I picked the A. And so it was a good choice. It turns out it was a good choice because that's the lower 500 megahertz region. That seems to be the less threatened of all the systems right now. Okay.
But, I was real surprised. I think I just 6 months ago bought another AVX system, and it was like I ordered it on B&H, and then 30 seconds later, I get a email from B&H telling me I can turn my AVX back in because of the frequency reallocation, and get $100 certificate or something like that. So, spend $700 to get a $100 certificate. So I did fortunately buy down on the lower end, but I still realize that those frequencies are still at risk, and probably 10 years down the road from now, those frequencies will be gone and everybody will have to be on something else. Yeah. And, be on a higher frequency or perhaps the FCC will realize a need for a specific band of frequencies for transmitters. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. And in any case, I think people really need to do their homework when you are going to go buy to an analog wireless system. I'd try to talk to some of the guys over at B&H, or if you're in one of the larger urban areas where you have a sound, one of the sound places like True Audio, Gotham Sound, whatever the others are, Location Sound. I'd definitely go and talk to them, get some advice.
Yeah, I realize now that when I got into this and started buying the wireless systems, I was doing it pretty blind. Yeah. And it really would have been smart to talk to Gotham or somebody else that really knows wireless systems and could have guided me, where the future is. And if I would have known that, maybe I wouldn't have gone with a G3 or a UHF system. I might have gone to something else, But, the G3 is such an industry standard, and everybody knows it and everybody has it. And, it's generally, once you figure it out, it's pretty easy to work with and pretty reliable.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, I have one last question. I'm
Sure.
dying to ask. If I'm not mistaken, you are the one that built a special little harness for an iPad mini.
Yeah.
Do you have that handy? Can you show us?
Yeah. Let me grab my bag. Hang on.
Yeah. So while he's doing that, just so you're aware, Gregg sent me a photo of this a while back. So he shoots with the Zoom F8. Looks like he's got a little Orca bag there. And so I was just telling him, you shoot with a Zoom F8, and you've got a little Orca bag, and you wanted some way to mount your iPad mini to use the app to, set up the F8.
Yeah, and one of the things that I started, I've been doing a lot of boom and mix at the same time, and so you've got your one hand arc with the boom, and you're trying to adjust gain levels, and then trying to monitor your gain levels. It was just really hard to see. Not that maybe I should lose a few pounds on my stomach or something. It might help a little bit, but so I about the same time, Zoom came out with their Bluetooth app that works pretty well. And all you have to do is basically pair your Bluetooth iPad. And all I do is I take my, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this. I take my iPad and I made a little, basically a bracket. And it just, this was another thing that was nice about the Orca 28 bags, or all the Orca bags, is the internal frame allows you to do something like this.
Yeah.
This is what I basically have.
Oh,
Let me see if I can get it to turn on. And what I do is I actually run I have an Anchor battery down in the front compartment, and one of the taps is a USB tap up to the iPad.
Okay.
And so it powers both the mixer, and it's not going to connect. I don't have a battery in the box right now, but basically that's what
it
looks like.
Everything just right there.
And what I like about it is that I don't really like trying to mix with the iPad. But I love the larger scale of the meters, and that the meters are out in front of you.
Yep.
That really seems to help, and you don't have to look as far down in order to see it.
Yep.
And so it's really worked out well. I've looked at the new control panel, and I don't know if I can. I think it may be too big to try to mount on this, but I might not be able to see the actors anymore.
Right.
If I get too much built up there. So.
Right. Well, that's pretty cool. And that just sort of, I assume you have some tools there. You just fashioned some aluminum with a sort of
this is a Home Depot project. Took me about, I don't know, 30 minutes or so.
Okay.
Just took some on the back side. You can see there's I put some paint on it, but it's just aluminum bar. Just bent it and mounted a couple pieces of plywood to it.
Yeah, and then you've just got some bungee straps there. It looks like to hold it in place.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it works really well. I mean, I've really it's made a lot of difference so far as the visibility of the meters when you're trying to boom. Makes it a lot easier to see the peaks, and make sure you're not attenuating your signal.
Yep.
That's worked out really well.
I think meters are underrated. A lot of people don't realize how important it is to have relatively large meters with a lot of segments on them.
Yeah.
And,
by the way, the Zoom just updated the firmware to the F8. It's on version 3. That came out a couple weeks ago, I think. And they changed the metering. It allows you to change the metering scale, where before it was just one fixed scale. And I think it was to expand the lower end of the metering, and it allows more visibility to a lower signal.
Okay. So. Interesting. Good. Well, Gregg, thank you so much for taking your time. I really appreciate that. I think there were some out in the community here that had some questions about how to do that wireless hop. That was super helpful. It was great to get your perspective on AVX versus G3, when each might be better suited for the job.
Yeah. And I really like the wireless hops. I won't do a shoot now unless I do it. I really like the comfort fact of of knowing that audio is being recorded someplace besides my mixer.
Mm-hmm.
That has saved me a couple times in the past. And then if you get the in-ear monitor from Sennheiser, it allows you to just plug on a monitoring capability into the same wireless network, and for with no difficulty at all, and pretty mild investment. So
yeah, very good. All right. Well, thanks again for your time, Greg.
yeah, no problem.
Appreciate it.
Take care, Curtis.
Talk to you soon. Okay, take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.